G'day, it's Mike from Aussie Mike's Bees with another update for the Varroa incursion in New South Wales, Australia. So we just got another update from the DPI dated the 6th of August. It's the 7th as I record this, and so this is the very latest information. So we won't waste any more time, we'll get straight into it and over to the screen. As we see here, the New South Wales Government Beekeeper Update, the 6th of August 2022. It's currently the 7th of August 2022, so the day after this was released. So this is the Biosecurity Emergency Order 2022, number 19. So we're commenced on number 19. So what do we have here? So the order has been updated to include conditions relating to swarms and feral bees, meaning any bees that have returned to a natural state. That's good, because up until now we weren't allowed to do anything with swarms, and we're looming up to spring, so already there's swarms about to happen, if not already happening. So in the general zone, that's the blue zone, which is the greater part of New South Wales, a person who is not a registered beekeeper, such as pest controller, can only interfere with or move feral bees, including swarms, for the purposes of destruction. So none of those people, so anyone who is not a registered beekeeper, cannot catch and keep a swarm at this stage. Now the next bit's interesting, because this is where we get a delineation. So registered commercial beekeepers can also catch and keep a swarm. So that pretty much rules out non-commercial. So amateur beekeepers at this stage are not allowed to catch swarms. Now I'm an experienced swarm catcher and I normally box them. I'm not allowed to because I'm not a commercial beekeeper. So once the swarm is in the hive, the same restrictions that apply to hive movements across the blue zone come into effect, because now it's a managed colony. Right, in the eradication zone, that's the red zone, and the surveillance zone, the purple, and the notification emergency zones. So that's all other zones except for the greater part of New South Wales. A person can only catch a swarm or remove a feral colony for the purposes of destroying that swarm or colony. So they can't be boxed up, they've got to be destroyed. Beekeepers will not be able to collect feral bees or swarms and place them in a hive in these zones. So they're still working on eradicating, and so particularly the red zone, they've got to wipe those out. So the current situation is the DPI tracing and surveillance work has confirmed 3 new detections of Varroa mite as field officers continue hive inspections with beekeepers across the state. New detections at Salamander Bay and Varroa Heights, bringing the total number of infected premises to 77 since the first discovery on the 22nd of June. Now the new infected premises fall within existing eradication zones, so within the red zones. And all confirmed cases either have clear links to existing cases or are geographically linked. And what does that quite mean? There are remote areas, and they've clearly linked those to existing outbreaks because of transport. So bees have been trucked from the original discovery red zone, been trucked to another site, and that's where the next site has been. Now the migration speed naturally of Varroa mite takes time, and so it's completely unlikely, impossible even, that the Varroa migrated and then didn't go anywhere in the middle. Obviously, it came from a truck transport of hives from one location to another, and that's where all of these new outbreaks that we've had that are remote from the Newcastle original outbreak. So what are we on to next? The DPI has conducted significant surveillance around the edges of most affected eradication zones around Newcastle. Now that's a part of the technique they've been using. Some people have said, well, why haven't they been eradicating as they go to wipe out what they find? And the reason for that is they're collecting data. The method they've been working on is they have a discovery, create a red zone, and that's 10 kilometres. Well, they've been going around the edges and working in and seeing what they find. And if there's a new discovery in that place, that creates a new red zone, a new 10k zone. And so there's lots of overlapping. They've just been overlapping all around each other as they make new discoveries on the edges. Getting back to the eradication part of it, they've begun the eradication process now because they're confident that they've found the outer reaches. And this is a really significant stage in this eradication process. As long as everyone stays locked down and don't move hives around or hide hives that they have, then at this stage we know where they all are. They're still doing surveillance, they're still looking for anything further around the edges and closing in, and the eradication stage is begun, and this is where they go in, they test and record and even send samples off for genetic testing and do the destruction of hives. Horrible for the beekeepers, but in the bigger scheme of things, this process, as brutal as it is well, at this stage it looks like it's going to work. I know there's a lot of pessimism about the possibility of this working. You've got to remember, this has happened before. This isn't the first outbreak in Australia. Townsville had an outbreak of Varroa jacobsoni, and it took, well, they were just about to declare it free and they had a second outbreak. And so the period began again, and that was the same process we're using now, just on a relatively smaller scale, but it was still full on. And that now has been declared free of Varroa. They're satisfied that that's free of Varroa. So it's a long-winded process, and we're not going to be out of the woods for quite a while to come. So it's going to be a process. We've begun this eradication process, and as long as we don't get any cowboys ducking their hives out of the zone and spreading it, we've got it contained. So if everyone pulls their weight, and the other side of it is the government has announced compensation. Commercial beekeepers will be compensated for their full loss. Amateur beekeepers, amazingly, have also been included with compensation as well. Now the funds for compensation is coming partly from government, partly from industry, quite a bit of it from industry, including the pollination industry. A lot of people bag the almond industry, for instance, that's the spreader of Varroa and other diseases. Well, you might be right about that, but they're also heavily controlled. The DPI spends a lot of time inspecting those colonies and making sure, up until now, making sure AFB didn't get the spread. And any outbreaks that happened were immediately destroyed. That same level is going on now. The almond crops due for pollination services. To increase manpower, we're getting volunteers from across the board. Now, a lot of those volunteers are amateur beekeepers or retired commercial beekeepers. So everyone's pitching in. So, okay, it might be a bunch of 60, 70, 80-year-olds out there, so it might not go as fast as you would like, but it boosts the numbers and gets boxes inspected and passed so that the pollinators can be on their way. So the field officers are confident that they've got the clear picture now, and they're refocusing efforts on tracing and euthanizing hives within the zones. It's really good news. Intensive surveillance and tracing activities, in addition to the statewide lockdown and creation of emergency zones, continue to play a critical role in the emergency response effort. So they've got this section of what do I do, and that's much the same as previously. If you find Varroa when you're doing testing, notify immediately. Now, just because you find something, like us Aussies, we're not experienced in testing and finding Varroa mite because it hasn't been around. So you might do your alcohol wash and there's something in there and you might think it's Varroa, but you might be wrong. It could be something else. So call the DPI straight away and say you suspect you found a Varroa mite in your alcohol wash, and they will guide you and even perhaps visit you. Well, that's going to happen. And that's where you might find that you're lucky, and particularly if you're one of the non-red yellow zones at the moment. The good news is a lot of people have been registering for the first time. Now, there's could be a whole bunch of old guys out there that never even knew that they needed to be registered, and they've found out by watching the news that, oh, I've kept bees for 30 years and I've never registered. Well, they've registered now and not facing fines and so on. But if you're still unregistered now and you get found, you're still facing that $1.1 million fine. That's how serious this biosecurity situation is. And that doesn't just apply to bees, but any biosecurity crime that you commit, you could be faced with that 1.1 million. Now, incidentally, a company can face a $2.2 million fine. So if you're the director of a company, you could get the fine for 1.1 million and your company could be hit with 2.2 million. That'll knock a big hole in your pocket. And it is possible to face jail time as well. Okay, getting back on. Notify the department. If you detect Varroa, call up and report immediately. What can I do? Right, this is an important part. What are you allowed to do? So you can harvest the honey and honeycomb within 48 hours of being told by an authorised officer that your bees are to be euthanized. Now, this is important. You can get your honey. Now, flow hivers, for instance, their supers are the most expensive part of the beehive, so you don't want that destroyed. So you can legally harvest and remove your super, your flow super. That's good news. So I'd be doing that. You can place your empty supers on hives to manage swarming. That's an important thing with spring coming up. As a part of your spring management and swarm prevention, you're allowed to put on supers to make space. Take action to manage American foul brood, small hive beetle, and deadouts and queenless hives. Now, of course, we want to manage that because as those colonies weaken, they become targets of robbing, and that can spread. That can be a spreader of all of those things plus Varroa, so we're allowed to do that now. Now, all these actions are subject to strict conditions. So more information in the red zone conditions can be found at this link. So what can't I do? So beekeepers in the red zone must not move their hives or bees away from their current site. They must not move apiary equipment outside the zone. So if you've got apiaries in two different places, one inside the zone and one outside the zone, you can't take your gear from one to another. And that would apply to your tools, your smoker, all of that. So you would have to have a separate suit, smoker, tools, supers, everything at each apiary that are in those two separate zones. And even if you've got two apiaries within the one zone, you can't move between them. So again, you've got to set up separates. So you cannot euthanize, burn or otherwise dispose of equipment unless directed and authorised by a biosecurity officer. So don't take it on your own to destroy your own colony, not until you've been authorised to do so. You cannot tamper with bees, hives, except as permitted above. So that's to pull, get your honey and pull your supers or add supers. Okay, when will I be visited by the DPI? So people in the red zone will be contacted, and I really feel for you guys. You're facing the potential, well, the eradication. It's not potential. You're facing the eradication of your colonies. So targeted surveillance has provided a clearer picture of the current spread of Varroa. The priority of the emergency response is now returned to euthanizing known infested hives and conducting more intensive surveillance within the red zone to identify any other hives that will require euthanizing. So that's saying that if they've found Varroa in your hive, it's going to be destroyed. And they're also testing more to see if there are any more. So when an authorised officer is tasked to visit you to discuss or work with your bees, they will be in touch via the contact details you've listed, and they will inform you of the address that they will be visiting, because your bees might not be where you live, for instance. You don't have to change your usual schedule in the meantime. They're going to arrange the time to suit each of you. And what will happen to my equipment? Unfortunately, in some circumstances it may be necessary to euthanize bee colonies in the eradication zone and destroy internal hive equipment such as brood, honey, frames. However, the DPI has completed a risk assessment on options to decontaminate external equipment such as hive boxes, pallets, straps, as well as metalware, so that they can be retained by beekeepers. Now, it's an interesting development. The response plan has been updated so equipment will only be destroyed when a risk assessment deems it necessary. You can get out of it if the risk assessment says they don't have to destroy all your gear. Now, I know on the compensation plan for amateurs is you'll get $550 per hive. Now, the fine print is there, you could take your supers off so you can save your flow hives or your normal supers. You can save them. The hive they're talking about is the brood. So if you've got a single brood or a double brood box, that's what they're going to destroy. And if you've got an option of treating the woodware and you choose to keep that part of it, then I think the amount is $200 or might be $250 you'll get. In my mind, why would I want to get? You're going to have to have that woodware treated. In my view, I would prefer to just have it bagged up and taken away, and the DPI take care of it, and I get $550 to buy new equipment and bees when we're allowed to resume beekeeping. I don't know about you. Put some comments downstairs what you would think, but that's the way I would do it. Take the lot, destroy the lot, take it away from here, and give me the money and I'll set up with fresh stock later. Okay, back into here. So when can I have bees again in the eradication zone? Yeah, That's a really good question. So the response plan for the eradication of Varroa mite follows a strategy agreed between the apiary industry, DPI, neighbouring jurisdictions and the Commonwealth. The aim of the response within the eradication zone is to eradicate all hosts of Varroa and maintain a program of host eradication in each zone for 3 years to minimise the risk of reintroduction of Varroa or survival of Varroa on undetected hosts within the zones. Now, part of what that entails is they'll keep baiting as well. The feral colonies are not getting off the hook here. They will be continuing the baiting program to knock out any ferals. So basically, I think that's what they're saying. No beekeeping in the red zones for 3 years. Just rereading over that. The aim of the response within the eradication zones is to eradicate all hosts. That's all bees. So in those red zones, that's the end of beekeeping for 3 years. If you know something different, let me know. Put in a comment. Reimbursement of registered recreational beekeepers in the red zones. So recreational beekeepers affected by the Varroa mite will be reimbursed for the destruction of their hives and bees and other property. If you are a recreational beekeeper and your hives are to be euthanized within the red zones, there are 3 options for reimbursement: destruction and disposal of bees and hiveware, euthanize bee colony and keep hiveware, euthanize nuke hives. So it's not saying here, but that compensation changes with each of those. If you're keeping your hiveware, you'll get the 250, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you allow them to destroy the lot, you get full compensation of 550 per hive. I know there's a whole bunch of people that disagree with this approach. I know a few of them, and well, we're stuck with it. You can get your hackles up about it as much as you want. It's the law. We've got to follow it, or risk that $1.1 million fine and potentially jail time as well. It was agreed to a long time ago that this would be the approach nationally. It's not just New South Wales, and everyone agreed with this. It's a national response. You know, there were outbreaks in all of these other countries at some stage, and they were not contained. New Zealand was roughly around 2000, 2002, something like that. But they were unaware of it for quite a while before they realised that the Varroa was there, and by the time they swung into action, it was too late. They'd already spread too far and too wide. And places like the States, the US, I think that outbreak was something like 1993, so they're old hands at it. But again, that's an enormous country bordering other countries. So there's only so much you can control when you've got land borders with other countries. Australia is in a unique, well, not totally unique, I mean there are other islands, but we're the biggest island, and we've got this unique potential to eradicate and wipe it out completely, and realistically we're on track for that. It's going to be hard for a whole bunch of people that can't keep bees for 3 years. It's going to be an ongoing surveillance to wipe it out. A horrible time. But it's better than living with Varroa. If we can get away with it, if we can eradicate, then we can return to normal beekeeping after that and still have honey and wax products and so on that are not tainted with the various treatments, the chemicals that they use everywhere else. And there's health risks involved with treating for Varroa too, a health risk for the beekeeper. So if we can avoid that and just go back to the cultural level of the integrated pest management triangle. So we're down at the bottom when we're integrating chemicals right now, but if we can get back to the lowest form, which is just that cultural, and keep an eye out, perhaps they can increase surveillance and maybe mechanise some of that with the new technology around, so surveillance happens more frequently or on a real-time basis with those Varroa monitoring hives that are out there now. That sounds good to me. Well worth putting some finance into that, considering the cost of this eradication program, but the massive cost if we do get Varroa, and it gets more than just the toehold. If it spreads, we're in trouble. No more news about that interesting professor who wants to release Varroa into the feral colonies to wipe them out. But I might have a laugh at him again in another video. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Comment, ask questions, subscribe, hit the bell if you want to be notified of any future updates. I'm trying not to be over the top with updates. But if you want more updates, let me know. I'll increase the frequency. If you're happy with the few that I do with a bit of time in between, I'm happy to do that too. So thanks for watching. Mike from Aussie Mike's Bees. Beekeeping, it's an obsession. Cheers.